And with me is Anthony Haddad, who is currently in Philadelphia, USA, but has just come back from Beirut, Lebanon, the country where he belongs to. And without further ado, I will pose the question on everyone's lips. Anthony, what is the situation in the Middle East, in the wider Middle East, and in Lebanon today?
Sure. So, Atul, I think it's by no means, by no means a slip of the tongue to say that the situation in the Middle East is explosive, as of recent, for lack of better words. What's happened, what happened in Tunisia and has spilled over to Egypt, to Libya, to many other places, to Yemen, to Saudi Arabia, to Syria, is truly historic in nature. I don't think this was on anyone's radar, neither in terms of U.S. foreign policy, what the White House had in mind for the Middle East, nor domestically in many of these countries. None of the people in these countries, even the ones that were really pushing for change, albeit silently, had any idea, in my opinion, that what was about to happen was going to happen in fact. So I think that by no means is a surprise that the events that are currently going on in the Middle East are truly historic. They've opened up great opportunities for the people in these respective countries. I was listening to a report a few days ago that in Egypt, there's a increased sense amongst the youth of Egypt that it's cool to be Egyptian. This is a brand. There's a brand equity issue that's emerging. I'm cool. I'm Egyptian. I'm cool. Apparently, if I don't if I'm not fudging these statistics, some survey in the U.S. a few days ago, I think 78% of Americans had a favorable opinion of the Egyptians. That's unheard of, and I think that's a testament to the events that are happening in the Middle East. What's going on in Lebanon is a little different. Lebanon has not historically had has had to some extent a functioning democracy. It's a democracy that works, but it's a democracy that has problems. Lebanon is a country that's has had a very long and tumultuous history with Syria. Whenever a Lebanese talks about Syria, they talk about Syria and the Syrian tutelage. Syria has had a very pronounced role in Lebanon for the last 30 years. To the south is Israel, of course, which we've had a very long, bloody history with, in 2006 most recently, in the war with Hezbollah. The types of issues that are occurring now in Lebanon, they're not the issues that are happening in the rest of the Middle East. The Lebanese are not asking for free elections because we have free elections. They're imperfect, but they're free. The types of issues that are going on in Lebanon are very much different. They deal with the ever never-ending question of what is the Lebanese state? Are we a greater part of the sort of Syrian state or not? There's a very sort of tug and pull between Lebanese nationalism and those that feel that they belong to a sort of larger state. That, of course, has a huge relation with our relation with Syria. The role of Hezbollah is, of course, a huge question in Lebanon. So the types of questions that we're currently dealing with in Lebanon, I would say, are very much affected by the rest of the region and what's happening in the region, but they're not of the same nature, given our history given our experimentation with democracy over the past 60 years since independence.
So my question to you is that since you just pointed out Lebanon is different, um, does that mean that this situation in the Middle East, this crisis, is not going to affect Lebanon that much, or does it mean that it might affect Lebanon in ways that cannot be anticipated, and the relations between Sunnis, Shiites, Maronites, and Druze might potentially be affected. Just want to get a handle of about the relationship between the wider Middle East and Lebanon.
Sure. Well, I mean, the Middle East in general is often the playground of larger and bigger powers, and that's especially true of Lebanon.
Yes.
Lebanon has very much historically been the playground of larger and bigger powers, both regional and international. So anything that happens in the region has bearing on Lebanon. Uh, I can't speak so much as to the effect of Egypt specifically on Lebanon, but how that, in my opinion, links directly to Lebanon is what has spilled over to Syria. Literally, right on our back door is something historical in Syria. I mean, for 30, 40 years, you've had Hafiz al-Assad and then his son
Yes.
Bashar al-Assad in complete power of this country. And there's great movement that's happening in this country, which has effect on what will happen in Lebanon. Syria is tied to Hezbollah, and if the Syrian regime falls flat, the role of Hezbollah is going to very much be at risk, in my opinion, in Lebanon. They currently have somewhat of a stranglehold on the country, and if the Syrian regime finds itself in dire straits, which it very much so is, the role of Hezbollah is increasingly being threatened in Lebanon, and that will definitely have bearing on Lebanon and the sort of relations that you talked about amongst the Sunnis, the Shia, the Christians, and the Druze. So I think everyone is very much looking intently from Lebanon to what's happening in Syria.
I see. So fundamentally, it is Syria that is going to determine how the effects of the Middle East crisis transpire, or how they shape Lebanon.
I believe so. I believe so.
So here's another question, which is we've talked a bit about Lebanon, but what I want to understand is again shifting back to not just Lebanon but the wider Middle East is how is the information revolution, the social media, globalization, and youth culture changing societies, hitherto very closed and in some ways still quite conservative societies?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I lived in Saudi Arabia from the years of 1996 to 2003 in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, which is an ultra-conservative city and ultra-conservative country.
Yeah.
I then had the opportunity to work in Saudi Arabia 5 years later in 2008. You really feel, you see change in the air. Information society, I mean, you see literally these countries 20 years ago had zero telecom infrastructure. Now they have mobile penetrations of 150 plus, meaning you have almost 2 phones per Saudi or per Qatari or per Emirati in these countries. It's incredible change, rapid change, which obviously has bearing on these societies. In Egypt, you see poor people that are paying. They live on, some of them, less than $2-3 a day. But there's still a push to sort of, go to internet cafes and be involved and go onto Facebook groups and Twitter. It's almost shocking, but you see that social media has really given a voice to these people where they didn't have it before, and increasingly, I think they're of the conviction that their voice really does matter. The story in Egypt is really one of people power, and that's how it's being. Increasingly, after the effect of what's happened, that's increasingly how it's painted domestically. So whether that was the case or not, whether foreign players were really the ones that ousted Hosni Mubarak, the national rhetoric in Egypt is very much one of people power and the role of social media and the role of Twitter and the role of Facebook. Yeah, absolutely. The social media has given people ammunition to seek and create change. So it's a great development in the Middle East.
So here's my question: what do the next 5 years hold for the Middle East? I know it's a terrible question because no one really knows that. What does it hold?
Let me go get my crystal ball, and I'll be back. 1 second. I mean, that's
And for Lebanon as well. What is it hold?
the thing with Lebanon is honestly, I'm a bit of a pessimist with regards to
Like this.
Lebanon. Lebanon especially is a country that you sort of are always on in bated breath about, because you really don't know what's going to happen. I think everyone is very anxious about what's happening with Syria now, what might happen with Iran, because that has bearing on the role of Hezbollah, and that's sort of the wild card for Lebanon right now. Other sort of, in Lebanon, the issue with Lebanon, and then I'll move on to the Middle East. The issue with Lebanon is that we have a series of pink elephants in that country. Pink elephants in the room that no one wants to talk about. The role of the Palestinians, the role of Hezbollah. Is this a country that really works? Are we a consociational democracy that's actually stable? And the very makeup of Lebanon, can that sustain for years? These are questions that no one really, they're talked about, but no one really wants to solve. They just want to win political battles and score points. So before we have serious discussions about very sort of fundamental questions like that in Lebanon, I really don't see that we're going to get anywhere. That, of course, doesn't look at what's happening in Syria and Iran, as I've said, and we need to sort of be intently observant of what's going on there. But I mean, I'm sort of neither, with respect to the Middle East at large, I'm neither pessimistic nor optimistic. I'm optimistic because a lot of these, Ben Ali in Tunisia, Mubarak in Egypt, and hopefully soon Gaddafi in Libya, these have been sort of trademark, or rather, household names that were sort of linked to lack of change in these countries, and now there's all of a sudden room for change. However, these dictators, if they've been good at anything, it's been about quelling any sort of opposition, not really supporting any domestic sort of organic growth in terms of civil society, in terms of institutions. So really, in a lot of these countries, you have political and economic and institutional vacuums. I'm a little pessimistic about what's to come, because there simply aren't strong, viable alternatives to take power where these dictators have left. So it sort of opens up the opportunity for fringe groups like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, which has been banned since 1950, to possibly take power. So I feel like, especially the U.S. administration, which is very concerned about that, I think it's a well-placed concern. I fear for Egypt and for Libya especially.
So is that your biggest fear for the region? And if so, what is the alternative? Surely you're not advocating a return to some kind of dictatorship, or are you?
No, I'm not. I'm not. I think what I'm advocating is realistic expectations.
Okay.
I think what I'm advocating is proactive policy from the U.S. administration to, not be bosom buddies anymore with dictators of the Middle East. I think what I'm advocating is really pushing on these dictators by foreign powers to open up space for organic growth. To have free elections, to have free press, to not be a journalist that self-censors yourself for fear of assassination. This is what I'm advocating for. The Middle East is really at a crisis point right now, a crucial crisis point. I think forces like social media, like the internet, like open information, open economies, these will ultimately, help the Middle East and set them in the right direction. But really, sort of, pulling the rug from under their feet and trying to install a whole new regime a la Iraq is not necessarily the best model for the rest of the Middle East.
I see. So finally, what is your greatest hope for the region? We've heard of the fears, we've heard of the concerns, but what is your greatest hope in the light of all that's passed over the last few days?
I think my greatest hope, and this is something I recently was in Doha for a conference with several other people from the Middle East that work in civil society and journalism sectors, and I think a shared thread amongst all of us was that people of the Arab world really do a lot of sort of self-reflection, introspection, to educate themselves about the possibilities and that they have right now. I mean, it's not often that one talks about it in these terms, but these dictators were ruling in many of these countries, but people were also turning a blind eye. It takes two to tango, and there needs to be a
Yeah.
lot of sort of education on a grassroots level as to what needs to be done, developing civil society, developing a sense of nationality. As I said earlier, it's really cool to be Egyptian right now, and that's something that the Egyptians, for example, need to capitalize on. In
Yeah.
Lebanon, for example, there's a huge movement amongst the youth, a non-sectarian movement, to say, let's place being Lebanese above being a Christian or a Shiite or a Sunni or a Dirzi. And these are the types of movements that might sound like, BS movements that aren't really going to lead to anything. But it's these types of grassroots movements, particularly amongst the
Yeah.
youth, that have tools like social media, like Facebook, like Twitter, that can really sort of scale up to broader society. And that's what I'm hopeful about, that the youth really realize how much power they have to change their societies.
Well, thank you, Anthony Haddad, for your time.
Thank
We
you.
are delighted. We are delighted to have you, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Likewise. Thanks a lot, Atul.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.